To see why this matters, rewind to the night the universe sped up, when the universe started accelerating. It began with dim candles in a dark sky. In 1998, two rival teams, one led by Saul Perlmutter, the other by Brian Schmidt and Adam Rees, used Type Ia supernovae as standard beacons to measure cosmic distances. These white dwarf detonations should shine with near-uniform brightness. Compare their apparent brightness to their redshift, and you get how much the universe has stretched Thingway blue. The teams expected a gentle slowdown. Gravity should be putting its foot on the brake. But the supernovas came in too dim for their redshifts. Dim meant farther than models predicted. Farther meant more expansion than expected. More expansion meant the expansion was speeding up. Phones lit up. Spreadsheets were rechecked. 1,000 small errors were hunted. Thus, evolution selection bias. The late-night calls ran in circles. When the dust failed to explain the dimness, when the cross-checks held, acceleration slipped into the vocabulary. Reluctantly at first, then with the weight of follow-up surveys, cosmology absorbed the result. If the universe is accelerating, something is pushing with negative pressure. The equations of general relativity allow it. Put a uniform energy density in the vacuum, call it lambda, and it acts like a tension in space itself, driving acceleration. Fold this into the cosmic energy budget, and you get a strange pie. About 5% ordinary matter, roughly a quarter dark matter, and the rest about 70% dark energy. Supernovae started the story, but the cosmic microwave background and baryon acoustic oscillations backed it up. Independent probes converged on a concordance model where lambda sets the tempo of expansion. There were other options. Some theorists tried quintessence, a slowly rolling field that mimics a cosmological constant but can vary in time. Others tinkered with gravity, modifying Einstein's equations on the largest scales. The skirmishes were serious, but the sky kept favoring a simple, stubborn term, a constant vacuum energy density that didn't care about when or where. That simplicity hid an absurdity. Quantum field theory says the vacuum isn't empty. Every field jitters, and those zero-point jitters carry energy. Add up the modes with a naive cutoff, and you overshoot the observed dark energy by a factor that breaks your intuition, orders upon orders beyond anything tolerable. Even with more careful renormalization and cancellations, you still end up with a mismatch that feels like a cosmic joke. Why is the vacuum energy so small yet not zero? Why is it close to the critical density today? The biggest term in the equation seemed to come from nothing, and yet that nothing refused to match theory by numbers that dwarf every other discrepancy in physics. Meanwhile, the human part of the story looked nothing like equations. Researchers who'd stake careers on deceleration sat in offices at 2 a.m., staring at plots that wouldn't budge. A graduate student watched a contour map line up with the parameters she learned to treat as a historical mistake, lambda, then printed it anyway. A principal investigator rehearsed the word acceleration and tried to say it without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. In emails, there was relief and dread. Relief that the data converged across telescopes and pipelines. Dread that the explanation pointed to the least intuitive feature of their toolkit. Accepting acceleration didn't settle the unease. The negative pressure that makes space expand faster isn't a fluid you can bottle. It's a property of the vacuum tied to gravitation and boundary conditions. You can't scatter it in a collider. You can't emit it from a star. You infer it from the way the whole tapestry stretches. And yet, for all its remoteness, dark energy reached into everything. It set the fate of galaxies that would never meet. It throttled the growth of structure, deciding which clumps of matter would have time to pool together before space stretched them apart. It set a horizon for what could ever be observed or influenced. A background parameter became the quiet author of the universe's long-term plot. But the numbers also raised a timing question that everyone tried not to. Anthropomorphize? Why now? Why does the era when matter and dark energy sit in rough parity happen to overlap with the era when telescopes and humans can notice? The safe answer invoked selection effects and the growth of structure. The uneasy feeling lingered. While cosmologists wrestle with emptiness, labs face a different void, experience. Brain activity could be mapped in spikes and waves, but the felt texture of a sensation wouldn't fit a coordinate system. In an operating room, an anesthesiologist could erase the world for a patient without stopping the heart or the reflex arcs. Consciousness went missing with a dosage chart. The void between activity and awareness wasn't cosmic, but it was just as stubborn. The bridge between these two voids wasn't obvious. One lived in redshifts and power spectra. The other lived in reports like, "I felt nothing, and I was there." Still, the idea that vacuum structure might leak into the thresholds that tip brain processes from silent to aware was too provocative to ignore. If acceleration came from a uniform energy of the vacuum, and if parts of the brain depended on quantum thresholds that felt the vacuum, then a parameter by supernovae might, in principle, leave fingerprints in a hospital chart. This is where caution matters. Cosmology doesn't rescue sloppy neuroscience, and brain talk doesn't solve the cosmological constant problem. But if there's a link, it has to pay rent in predictions. Before we get to those bets, we need to face the second void head-on and ask what exactly went missing on the operating table, and why spikes aren't blue. The hard problem walks into a lab. To understand what went missing on the operating table, start with a split that sounds pedantic but isn't. The easy problems ask how the brain integrates information, controls behavior, focuses attention. We can track spikes, synapses, networks. The hard problem asks why any of that feels like anything. No pattern of voltage is inherently blue. No frequency of firing tastes like coffee, yet somehow subjective experience shows up. That's the hook your brain can't let go of. The gap between doing and feeling is the psychological cliff edge that turns casual viewers into late-night debaters. Clinicians discovered a lever that isolates the gap. Anesthesiologists silence experience while leaving the machine running. Pupillary reflexes can survive. The spinal cord can withdraw from pain. The heart keeps time. Give the right molecules at the right dose, and the patient stops reporting, stops forming memories, stops being there. Then minutes or hours later, with the same body and the same basic wiring, the world floods back. The on-off switch is unnervingly clean. Other cases sharpen the outline. In blind sight, damage to primary visual cortex destroys conscious seeing, but some visual processing still guides behavior. Patients deny seeing a stimulus, yet guess its location better than chance. Split brain surgeries, severing the corpus callosum, can produce two reporting centers in one skull, each half handling tasks and making choices, with the narrator in the left hemisphere confabulating coherence. The hardware works. The felt center flickers, divides, or goes mute. Neuroscience rallies around correlations. Find the neural correlates of consciousness, patterns that show up when someone reports seeing, fades when they don't, and track the richness of experience. We've got candidates, frontal-parietal ignition, recurrent loops in sensory cortices, thalamocortical rhythms. But a correlate isn't a cause, and it isn't an explanation. Saying this pattern goes with pain doesn't tell you why pain is like anything rather than like nothing. So theories step in. Global Workspace suggests that when information wins a broadcasting competition, it becomes globally available to multiple systems. Language, memory, motor experience rides along with access. It predicts ignition-like events and explains why attention matters. Integrated information theory posits that consciousness is the amount and structure of causal integration in a system, quantified as phi. It offers a metric and a geometry of experience, but struggles to map onto mechanisms and sometimes assigns experience to systems few would accept. Predictive processing reframes the brain as a prediction machine, minimizing error between models and sensory input. It links perception, action, and attention with a single principle and explains illusions, but it still leaves the field of prediction unexplained. All of these help design experiments and interpret data. None of them explains why a particular neural dance is lit from the inside, and the lab has to measure without wrecking the thing measured. The second you force a report, you recruit prefrontal systems and confound the state you wanted to observe. Ethical constraints limit invasive interventions in humans. Animal models can't report at all. We triangulate with paradigms like no report. Tasks, decoding from brain signals during perception without asking for a button press, and clever manipulations that isolate awareness from performance. Here, a different kind of coincidence crept in, a numerical whisper that some physicists took seriously. Certain timescales whispered by consciousness researchers, tens of milliseconds for perceptual integration, sit near timescales one could derive if quantum states underpinning neural events collapse by an objective rule. The math isn't proof, it's a nudge. It says if there's a bridge, you might find it at these intervals. Most neuroscientists shrugged and moved on. A few didn't. Meanwhile, anesthesia kept offering leverage. The Meyer-Overton correlation tied anesthetic potency to oil-gas partition coefficients across wildly different molecules, hinting that hydrophobic pockets in proteins are key. Cell membranes and cytoskeletal structures house these pockets. Clinically, agents as different as halothane, isoflurane, and sevoflurane all flip experience while sparing much of the rest of physiology. The specificity is strange. Consciousness is fragile to these agents in a way reflexes aren't. Psychologically, that clean split body online, you offline, hits the fear center and the curiosity switch at the same time. Ethics force us to be careful. Turn knobs too hard and you harm. Turn them too softly and you learn nothing. So the field-refined non-invasive measures, e.g. microstates, MEG phase relationships, perturbational complexity indices, using transcranial magnetic pulses to measure how richly the cortex responds. Under anesthesia, the brain's echo simplifies. The response loses diversity. The indices drop. Report vanishes and complexity collapses together. We're getting better at mapping the boundary. Even with better maps, the explanatory gap stays. You can knock out consciousness by disrupting thalamocortical loops, yes. You can restore it as connectivity returns, but are you turning off a broadcast channel or snuffing out a physical process that generates experience? The answer shapes what counts as a basic ingredient. If experience depends on classical network dynamics alone, the hunt stays inside standard biophysics. If, however, there's an objective physical threshold set by something like gravitational self-energy for when superposed possibilities give way to definite events, then the lab is touching a parameter that lives in the same equations as the universe's expansion. That's the risky bridge. It doesn't claim that thoughts control reality. It claims that the event called a conscious moment might be the kind of physical event whose timing is set by deep constants. To cross the bridge, you need a route that goes from numbers to needles, timescales, amplitudes, dose-response curves, and you need predictions sharp enough to fail. Enter a duo who tried to write those predictions down. One brought gravity and objective collapse mathematics. The other brought a place inside neurons where those collapses might matter. Their plan was audacious, heavily criticized, and still testable. It's where the math coincidence becomes a target and the operating room becomes a physics lab. Orchestro are the most controversial bridge. Start with a rule that sounds like science fiction. Superpositions don't last forever. Roger Penrose argued they don't collapse only when measured. They collapse on their own, objectively, when the difference in their mass distributions makes space-time too strained to hold both at once. Compute the gravitational self-energy of the difference between the two states, invert it, and you get a timescale. That's the objective reduction, the OR in orchestra, R. The claim isn't that the mind collapses wave functions, it's that nature collapses them on a schedule set by gravity's bookkeeping. That gives you a clock, but not a place to hang it in the brain. Enter Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who'd spent a career staring at consciousness switches. He pointed at microtubules, hollow cylinders built from tubulin proteins that scaffold neurons, guide transport, and shape synapses. Inside neurons, microtubules crisscross like quiet highways. Hameroff suggested they're not just struts. They might host quantum states in hydrophobic pockets, shielded enough to sustain coherent excitations, orchestrated objective reductions, hence orchestrated, would then occur in structured brain-guided waves producing discrete moments of experience. The picture looks like this. Tubulin states form coherent superpositions across segments of a microtubule lattice. Gravitational self-energy of the mass distribution difference sets a collapse time. Neural context orchestrates when and where ensembles reach the threshold. Each collapse is a moment, elementary now, that integrates into streams we call consciousness. The brain still computes classically, but punctuated by these objective quantized events. Critics didn't wait. Max Tegmark ran the numbers in 2000 in a warm, wet brain decoherence times for superpositions of charges or dipoles plotted to femto to picoseconds, far too fast to align with tens of milliseconds dynamics. Thermal noise, ions, collisions, everything screamed no quantum. Others argued that even if microtubules could host coherent modes, scaling coordination across a neuron or network would drown in biological mess. Penrose and Hameroff replied on two fronts. First, they said Tegmark's target was off, not free charges inside us all, but conformational states in hydrophobic pockets and collective excitations along microtubule lattices, potentially protected by ordered water layers and lattice symmetry. Second, quantum biology was quietly rewriting what too warm meant. Photosynthetic complexes showed long-lived coherence at room temperature guiding energy transfer. Avian navigation pointed to spin-dependent reactions sensitive to weak fields. Enzymes exploited tunneling. If nature could engineer local coherence in messy environments, maybe neurons had found a niche. Evidence trickled in, suggestive but not decisive. Experiments reported anesthetic molecules binding at specific hydrophobic sites on tubulin and nearby proteins consistent with the Meyer-Overton correlation. Optical studies in vitro hinted at microtubule resonances, photonic, phononic, or both, in frequency bands that overlap with neural rhythms. Some groups saw anesthetics damp or these signals. Other groups saw nothing beyond artifacts. The field split along familiar lines. One camp saw noise. The other saw signal loss and noise that better rigs could surface. Even if coherence exists, the gravitational piece is a wild card. Penrose's formula ties collapse time to a physical quantity, the mass distribution difference, making it, in principle, parameterizable. That's where our story's cosmology sneaks back in. If objective reductions are real, and if the vacuum carries a uniform energy density, lambda, does that background affect the threshold or the elasticity of space-time that the superposition strains? Penrose himself focuses on self-energy, not cosmology, but the conceptual door is open. Collapsed timing might indirectly carry a fingerprint of the vacuum's properties. Caution, again, there's no accepted derivation tying lambda directly to neuronal events. But the structure is tempting. Orchestra offers a time constant that could line up with perceptual integration windows. Microtubules offer a substrate with drug-accessible pockets. Anesthesia offers a lever to modulate the substrate. If a cosmological parameter nudges the collapse threshold, potency curves and resonance Q factors might show subtle testable regularities. The stakes aren't small. If gravity helps decide when neural possibilities gel into facts, then cognition is brushing up against the same machinery that shapes galaxies. Consciousness wouldn't be outside physics. It would be a series of objective physical events timed by constants that also live in cosmology. That doesn't make thoughts cosmic engines. It makes conscious moments part of nature's schedule. Human beats kept the debate grounded. A postdoc in Tucson watched a microtubule prep drift under the microscope and swore at a vibration coming through the bench. Across the world, a theoretical physicist scribbled collapse integrals on a whiteboard, paused, and muttered that biology would never keep phase. Emails flew, preprints stacked up, and conference Q&As turned into careful fencing matches between chemists who knew proteins and physicists who knew decoherence. Then came updates that neither side could fully ignore. Better anesthetic binding maps pinpointed hydrophobic sites with potencies tracking clinical effects. Resonance measurements improved, though they still fought artifacts. The line between nothing there and not there yet stayed blurry, which is why pre-registered, blinded tests became the drumbeat. If orchestra is right, dose-response curves should align with resonance damping in ways classical models don't predict. If it's wrong, the curves won't care about those putative modes, and hovering over all of it is that backstage parameter, the cosmological constant. If the vacuum's quiet push shows up anywhere near a thought, it'll show up in the timing of objective reductions. That's a claim you can miss or hit. To follow it, we need to put lambda on the math and see if the bridge holds when numbers push back.